They say the dead don't speak, that once buried, their stories are silenced forever. But on one stormy, windswept night, a grieving man found out just how wrong that belief could be. As thunder rolled across the sky and rain poured down in sheets, he stood alone at his late wife's grave, lost in sorrow, until a faint, heart-wrenching sound pierced the silence. It was the cry of a child, not from the path, not from the trees, but from beneath the ground. Driven by fear, confusion, and something he couldn't explain, he began to dig through the soaked earth with trembling hands. What he unearthed was not his wife's remains, but something far more disturbing, something that would change everything he believed about death, love, and the things that lie hidden in the dark. James had made it a ritual every evening, just before sunset. He would visit the lonely grave tucked away at the far edge of the old cemetery. It had been a year since his wife, Clara, was taken from him in a violent car crash on a rain-slicked highway. One moment she had kissed him goodbye. The next, she was gone forever. Since that day, James hadn't missed a single visit. He would sit beside her tombstone, whisper to the cold marble as if she could still hear him, pouring out his grief, his regrets, and his desperate longing for one more moment, just one. The cemetery was always still during those visits. Death has a way of silencing everything around it, the trees, the wind, even the birds. All that surrounded James was a heavy, breathless quiet, a silence so complete it pressed against his chest like a weight. But that night, something was different. The sky was darker than usual, cloaked in bruised clouds that grumbled with distant thunder. The wind carried a strange scent like earth mixed with something older. As James approached the grave, he felt at first an odd chill, not of the wind, but something colder, emptier. And then he heard it, a sound that didn't belong in a place of the dead. It was faint at first, a soft whimper, almost like the wind playing tricks on him. But then it grew louder, more desperate, unmistakable. The sound of a child cry, and it wasn't coming from the trees or the path behind him. It was coming from beneath the ground, from right next to Clara's grave. James froze. His breath caught in his throat, and for a moment, all he could hear was the blood pounding in his ears. The child's cry was clearer now, fragile, broken, soaked in fear. It echoed from the very soil beneath his feet, as though some unseen, tortured soul was trapped just below the surface, begging to be heard, begging to be saved. His mind raced. Was it real? Could a child actually be buried alive? Was this a hallucination born from grief? The very thought sent a wave of nausea through him. He looked around, hoping, praying, that someone else had heard it too. But the cemetery, like always, was deserted. Just weathered stones, crooked trees, and a wind that had begun to howl like a warning. And then, the crying changed. It wasn't just sobbing now, it was aware, responsive. It seemed to rise and fall with his movements, as though it sensed him, as if it was reaching out only to him. His instinct screamed at him to leave, to run far from that cursed patch of earth. But his legs wouldn't move, because deep inside, past the fear, past the logic, something felt familiar. Compelled by a force he couldn't name, James dropped to his knees beside Clara's grave. The soil was cold and wet beneath his palms. He leaned in, pressing his ear to the ground. For a moment, there was silence. Then he heard it. Not just cry, a whisper. Faint, trembling, yet sharp enough to pierce his soul. Help me. His blood ran cold. That voice, it wasn't just any child's. There was something heartbreakingly familiar about it, like a memory buried deep in his bones. Tears welled up in his eyes. Maybe it was grief. Maybe he'd finally gone mad. But then the voice came again, louder, closer, more desperate. Help me, Daddy. The word daddy echoed through James' mind like a hammer striking glass. His breath hitched. That voice, small, scared, and pleading, cut through the storm, through the grief, through the numbness he had lived in for the past year. He stared at the ground, heart racing, unable to believe what he had just heard. He and Clara had never had children. It was their dream, a dream taken from them too soon. Could this be some cruel trick of the mind, or something far worse? James shook as he stood up, staggered back a step, then turned his gaze toward the maintenance shed near the cemetery gate. He hadn't noticed it before, but a rusty shovel was propped up against the wall, partially hidden by ivy and shadow, as though it had been placed there for him. Waiting. He grabbed it without thinking. The rain came down harder now, drenching him to the bone, but he didn't feel the cold. All he could hear was the child's voice, that haunting daddy, repeating over and over in his head. He returned to the grave, knelt, and drove the shovel into the soaked earth. The sound of metal piercing mud rang out across the empty cemetery like a scream. He dug with desperation, clumps of dirt flying with each thrust, the ground swallowing his knees, his hands blistering on the wet handle. His breaths were ragged, his vision blurred, not from rain but from tears. "I'm here," he whispered hoarsely, not even sure who he was talking to anymore. "I'm here, sweetheart. Just hold on." But the more he dug, the stranger things became. The soil beneath Clara's grave didn't feel right. It was too soft, as if it had been disturbed recently. And the further he went down, the colder it got, not the natural cold of wet dirt, but something deeper, unnatural, a biting chill that seemed to pulse from within the ground itself. Then suddenly, the shovel struck something solid. Not the sleek finish of Clara's coffin, but something else. Rock. Smaller. Wooden. James dropped to his knees and brushed the dirt away with his hands, his breath catching in his throat. It was a box. Old, unmarked, and sealed shut with rusted nails. No name. No dates. No markings. But the moment his fingers touched it, the crying stopped. Complete silence fell around him, too complete. Not a single gust of wind. No rain. No sound at all. And for the first time that night, James was truly afraid. James stared at the box, his chest heaving, heart threatening to explode inside him. The silence pressing down on the graveyard was suffocating, like the whole world had paused to watch what he would do next. Even the rain, which had moments ago poured relentlessly, now fell in slow, muffled drops, like time itself had bent around this moment. With trembling fingers, he reached out and touched the lid again. The wood was damp, warped from age and moisture, but beneath the rot, it pulsed with something raw. He felt it like a heartbeat, faint but real. His instinct screamed for him to stop, to bury it again, to run and never return. But something stronger kept him there, a strange pull, like a thread tugging at his soul. His hands moved on their own, prying at the nails with the edge of the shovel, forcing the lid loose inch by inch. With a final creak, the top of the box snapped open, and inside, a doll. At first glance, it was just an old porcelain doll, dressed in faded lace and ribbons soaked from the soil. But James' breath caught when he looked closer. The doll's eyes were glass, wide, pale blue, and open far too wide for comfort. Its face was cracked down one cheek like a silent tear, and its lips were curved. Not into a smile, not exactly. More like a knowing smirk. One that hadn't been painted on. It had grown there. And then, its eyes moved. Just a twitch, barely perceptible, but enough to send James stumbling backward in shock. The doll blinked slowly, as if waking from a long sleep. Its porcelain eyelids scraped faintly against its glassy sockets. And then, it smiled. A low whisper floated from the box, soft as breath, sharp as a blade. "Thank you for letting me out." James' mouth went dry. His skin prickled. He couldn't move, couldn't breathe. Something ancient and cold spilled out of the box like smoke, something that didn't belong in the world of the living. Then his phone vibrated violently in his pocket, buzzing like an alarm. He pulled it out with shaking hands. The screen was glowing, not with messages or missed calls, but with a photograph. It was an old photo of his wife as a little girl, and in her tiny arms was that same doll. James stared at the photo on his phone, his fingers trembling. The image looked old, decades old, faded at the corners, tinged yellow with time. But there was no doubt. It was Clara. No mistaking those eyes, that shy smile. A child maybe 7 or 8 years old, standing in front of a large Victorian-style house he didn't recognize, and nestled in her arms, cradled like a beloved companion, was the doll. The same cracked porcelain face, the same sky-blue eyes, the same silent, smug expression. James' head swam. Why had she never told him? Clara had always been private about her childhood, brushing off his questions with vague answers. It was complicated, she'd say, or not worth digging up. He thought it was just pain from losing her parents young. But now he wondered if it was something far darker. He looked down at the box again. The doll hadn't moved, but it didn't need to. Its presence filled the space like poison, heavy, invisible, choking. James could feel something shifting inside him, a cold realization taking root in his gut. This wasn't just a toy. It wasn't a keepsake. It was a curse. Maybe Clara had buried it, hidden it. Maybe she thought she could leave that part of her past behind, bury it with the name she'd left behind when she became his wife. And maybe it had waited all these years, in silence, in soil, until someone desperate enough, broken enough, loved her enough, would come looking. Clara. James whispered into the night, tears streaking down his rain-drenched face. What did you do? What did you keep from me? The phone vibrated again. This time, it wasn't a photo. It was a recording, audio. And when he played it, her voice came through. Not adult Clara, little Clara, whimpering, whispering through static. Don't open the box. Please. Don't let her out again. But it was too late. The doll slowly turned its head toward him and smiled wider. James dropped the phone. It hit the muddy ground with a soft splash, the screen still glowing faintly in the dark. He couldn't look away from the doll. Its wide eyes now seemed to shimmer faintly, reflecting not the storm around him, but something behind him or inside him. A gust of wind tore through the cemetery, but it didn't feel like weather anymore. It felt like a presence, as if something had stepped through a door, something that didn't belong in this world. The air grew impossibly cold, and James' breath fogged with every shallow exhale. His hands were numb, but not from the rain. It was the kind of cold that came from within, from terror, from truth. And then, the doll spoke, not in a whisper this time, not in Clara's voice, in its own. A voice like rusted hinges and broken glass scraped across stone. You should have left me buried. The sound didn't come from its mouth, it came from everywhere. From the trees, the ground, the sky. The doll never blinked. It just stared, its gaze drilling into James' soul like it knew every memory, every secret, every sorrow he had buried deep within him. Suddenly, the earth beneath him began to tremble, softly at first, then stronger. Graves shuddered, tombstones groaned, and from the cracked soil around Clara's grave, hands began to emerge. Small hands, childlike, pale, crawling up from the dirt, clawing their way toward the surface. James stumbled backward, horrified. He could hear crying again, more than one voice this time. Dozens of them, all children, all weeping, some screaming, some laughing. Their cries surrounded him like a sickening lullaby. The doll stood upright now, though James hadn't seen it move. Mud dripped from its dress. Its porcelain feet cracked the edges of the box as it stepped forward, one slow step at a time, toward James. She tried to trap me forever, the doll hissed, its eyes glowing faintly now. But love always brings them back. You dug with your heart. And now, you're mine. The sky above the cemetery split open with a violent crack of lightning, illuminating the horror around him. James fell to his knees, staring at the thing he had unleashed, not knowing if this nightmare had just begun, or if he'd been living in it far longer than he realized. James couldn't move. His limbs felt frozen, not by the cold, but by the weight of dread sinking deeper into his bones with every breath. The doll stood just a few feet away now, unmoving but impossibly alive. And then the crying stopped, all at once. The small pale hands that had clawed their way out of the soil now hung limp, suspended halfway above ground, as if the earth itself had exhaled. Silence fell again, but it wasn't peaceful. It was the silence before something terrible speaks. And then the doll did. Do you know her real name, James? James blinked. He shook his head, slowly, mouth dry. The doll tilted its head, almost playfully. Not Clara. That was the name she gave you. Her name, before she ran, was Leora Ashwell. The name hit him like a cold slap. It sounded ancient, wrong, like something that didn't belong in a human mouth. The doll took another step forward, her tiny feet pressing no indent into the mud, as though she hovered just above the earth. She was born in that house by the forest, the one in the photo. A place of old blood, a family bound by bargains. Her mother gave her to me. As payment, one soul for another. A child for power. James shook his head violently. No, Clara. She was kind. She was good. She was. She was mine. The doll snapped. Until she broke the contract. Until she tried to bury me with her past, seal me beneath stone, and forget what she owed. But death doesn't sever oaths, James. Love doesn't erase them. You brought me back. The doll raised its hand, slow, deliberate, and James gasped as the air grew impossibly dense, crushing, filled with static like a storm trapped in his lungs. The wind howled around him, and from the depths of the open grave, a shape began to rise. A woman's silhouette, soaked in mud, hair tangled and dripping. I shut tight. Clara, but not as he remembered her. Her face was older than it should have been, worn by grief and secrets. Her mouth open, and the voice that emerged was cracked with sorrow. James, I told you not to come tonight. He reached out instinctively, tears flooding his eyes. But the doll only laughed, a high, brittle sound like breaking bones. Too late now. You opened the door. Now she belongs to me again. The ground beneath James split wide, an abyss opening like a mouth ready to swallow him whole. And from within, voices wailed, calling his name, pulling at him. And for the first time in his life, James didn't know whether to run or jump in. James stood at the edge of the pit, staring into the darkness that had split the earth open like a wound. The screams from below twisted through the air, children's voices, Clara's voice, his own voice, echoing, overlapping, creating a chorus of despair so loud it seemed to shake his very soul. Clara stood just across from him, her body ghost-like now, flickering like a candle fighting wind. Her eyes, once warm, were clouded with fear and sorrow. You shouldn't have dug, James, she whispered. She was bound. I paid the price to keep her buried. The doll stood between them, silent again, but smiling wider than before. Its porcelain arms slowly lifted, as if conducting the agony around them. There is only one way to take her place again. It hissed, turning its face toward Clara. A soul for a soul. The box was never a prison. It was a bargain. And you, James, you've offered yourself willingly. James's knees buckled, The pit beneath him pulsed like a heartbeat. He could feel it calling to him, its whispers sliding into his mind like needles. She can live if you take her place. She can breathe again if you give up yours. He looked at Clara, who shook her head violently. No, she cried. You don't understand. She doesn't just want your body, James. She wants your soul. She'll trap you there forever. She feeds on pain, regret, on love. Don't give her what she wants. But James' mind raced. The memories of Clara, their life together, the laughter, the plans they made, the way she smiled when she danced barefoot in the kitchen, and the way she died, alone, trapped in twisted steel, calling his name with her last breath. Could he walk away now, knowing she'd be lost to this thing for eternity? He looked into Clara's ghostly eyes and stepped forward, toward the pit. The doll tilted its head. Clara screamed, "Don't do this. If I don't, you'll be hers forever," James whispered. His voice cracked. His heart thundered. And with one final breath, he closed his eyes and jumped. James plunged into the darkness. For a moment, there was nothing. No pain, no sound, just silence, like drifting underwater. And then, burning, his body twisted, not in flesh, but in spirit. The doll's laughter echoed all around him, louder, higher, endless. He saw flashes, images carved into the walls of his mind. Children crying in candlelit rooms. Clara as a child, screaming in a circle of salt. A woman chanting. A door opening. And then himself, trapped in the same tiny box he had opened. Except now, he wasn't looking at the doll. He had become it. Trapped. Powerless. Silent. Above him, the world moved on. Clara's ghost collapsed by the grave, weeping. The pit sealed itself with a final groan, as if it had never been opened. The shovel lay abandoned, rusted, swallowed by the mud, and the cemetery returned to stillness. But if you ever walk by Clara's grave on a stormy night, if you listen closely between the thunder and the wind, you might hear a child crying, or worse, a voice, low, hollow, familiar, whispering from beneath the ground. Thank you for letting me out. If this story gave you chills, like the video to keep the graveyard quiet. Subscribe for more terrifying tales that dig deep into the unknown. Share this video with a friend, but don't blame us if they can't sleep tonight. And remember, some boxes should never be opened.